Well, thank you, Kevin. Pleasure to be with you all this afternoon. And Kevin, wow, you must have said 30 years of working together. Boy, do I feel old. Wow. Okay, well, let's dig into the topic here. So at the end of the day, there are really two primary models of sales forecasting. There's the weighted pipeline and what we call forecast categories. And both are used extensively, but we also know that they are both far from perfect. You know, with the weighted pipeline, we're invariably projecting deal closure based off of little more than judgment when it comes to amounts, closing dates, and closing probabilities. And the fatal flaw of forecasting on a weighted pipeline is that you can't win 70% of a deal. Essentially, you win 0 or you win 100%. So the one real benefit of a weighted pipeline is that it's a method that does allow for a super easy calculation, and it may work for mature businesses really at a macro level, but it certainly isn't accurate at a micro level for most organizations. The second method for a forecasting is based on the categories, and that's a slightly better approach, but frankly, it still falls short. Again, because judgment is really a significant part of the recipe, it's obviously prone to errors in judgment, variability in judgment. And when it comes down to amounts and closing dates and milestone steps, it's really the salesperson interpreting from their point of view the prospect's buying process and where they are in their selling process. And one person's notion and interpretation of qualified, and I've seen this personally, can be very different from another. You know, as we heard Kevin say earlier, you know, every CMO I've ever met yearns to have predictable, sustainable, and profitable revenue growth. And part of achieving this is directly related to a mastery of the sales forecasting process. Tools like win-loss reviews and analysis are critical to drive productivity and win rate. However, forecasting is all about understanding the timing and momentum of a deal. So wouldn't it be nice to be able to better predict when you're able to close a sale? They say mother is the necessity of invention, or necessity is the mother of invention, rather. And it's really out of sheer frustration while running a Xerox national account business unit that was comprised of almost only large deals that I was driven to pioneer an approach that we later nicknamed Path to Closure. And my goal was to really create a process that could be used by any member of the sales force at the sales management level and at my level of, you know, running the branch as a vice president, and do so in collaboration with a prospect where a rep would be able to understand, and watch these words, understand from the buyer's point of view, three things. What from their perspective had to happen to get the deal done? 2, confirm that the buyer's, what the buyer's desired implementation or go live date is. And thirdly, really allow my team to understand what they could do themselves that was under their control to best support the buyer's timing and processes. So let me underscore for a minute, understanding the timing of a deal that is particularly critical, because all the other approaches that people use really ignore this dimension. And everything tends to be interpreted from the sales rep's point of view. And I could not tell you the number of times a sales rep would forecast something, and then you'd say, well, have you done your path to closure? You'd check in CRM and you'd see they hadn't done a path to closure. And that when they were forced to go back and have that conversation with the client and share timing and really understand things at a granular level from a prospect's point of view, boy, often there was a very, very different picture. So let me take you through how the concept works, and really I'm going to walk you through a very generic conversation. So this is going to be very vanilla, and for each of you who want to employ this, I'll give you some tips at the end in terms of how you may tailor this. But typically I teach salespeople to work backwards. So a conversation may go something like this. Picture you're sitting beside your prospect and you say, you know, I'd really like to get a better understanding of how this, you know, decision cycle is going to go. And, you know, that would frankly really allow me to provide you with better support. So what has to happen between now and your desired delivery or go live date or your implementation date? What is it? So let's just start with, you know, when do you think you need to be up and running? And then you stop talking. And the client, the prospect might ponder a little bit and they'll say something like, well, you know, we're kind of targeting October 31st. So bingo, you take a white piece of paper and you write down October 31st on the right-hand side of the page. And we call that our anchor date. So now we want to work back. And the first thing we want to do is say, Mr. Prospect, is there any particular significance behind that date? And you'd be shocked at what you hear. Sometimes they have a board meeting on October 30th and they're going to present at that board meeting. Well, then you know, wow, that is going to depend on an outcome very close to that date. So that introduces more risk. So by asking the significance that's behind the date, the sales rep can really provide some insight on how critical it is to be up and running by then. You know, sometimes there might be end user training, there might be a whole bunch of things that need to happen and need to be slotted along a timeline before the client or the prospect can be enabled to go live. So this is where you start building out your timeline. So the salesperson might then say something like, well, if you want to be up and live by the 31st, then we'll need a signed contract by October 31st since we have a need for 30 days of implementation time. Does that work for you? Yes, it does. Okay, so now I'm going to draw another line to the left of my anchor date and say place order October 31st. And then the salesperson continues the dialogue and you say, well, you know, what else has to happen? Well, you can ask as many questions as you have to in order to determine what are all the key steps the customer is going to go through. So let me give you an example. There could be a legal review. Oh, so how does that work? Well, if we're doing this at an end of a quarter, how much time does your legal team usually need for review? Because then it should mean that we should try and get all of the business terms worked out by September 15th so we can get that into legal, and you get the point. And you know, many enterprise and complex solutions today have multiple stakeholders. So this methodology gives you an opportunity to really understand where they interact and who needs to be involved. So, you know, whether you have to have a proof of concept and how long does that have to take. And I'm just giving you, you know, pretty pedantic milestones. Use the milestones that are pertinent and relevant to your business. But an example would be, okay, well, you know, I know you want to see a demonstration. Let's talk about the stakeholders that need to be at that demonstration. Who do you think that needs to be? Who needs a vote? And who's, you know, wanting to just be there for information only? And so it really allows you to get extraordinarily granular and actually get the prospect to share the information that you need to understand all of the steps in the process, and then come to a realistic assessment of how this is going to play out. So fundamentally, the rep and the prospect mutually understand the key dates and collaborate together on the go forward plan. The rep understands clearly when the prospect expects to be fully implemented and when they're expecting to sign the order. And the sales cycle is also more likely to be kept on track, because I can tell you when I did this, when I was leading sales cycles personally, I always kept that piece of paper. And I would always bring it back. Geez, last time we talked, we said this, did anything change? And so you can always use it to update as an update point with a prospect at any time to see if there are any changes to the prospect or any new players. And as we all know, in the enterprise space, the new players are fast and furious. The result of all this is you get forecasting that is really better and more accurate. So I was asked to share really how this came about and evolved. And the fact of the matter was, I was leading the only national accounts branch at Xerox Canada and was heavily reliant on winning these really large deals. All of the other branches had much less risk related to large deals. And so it became really critical for me to have any kind of forecast accuracy, which we know also comes with business credibility, that I really had to drive to a much higher level of accuracy, because at the end of the day, like I've said before, you can't win 50% or 75%. You either win or lose. And so our deals were large and complex. And as a result, being accurate, not only for me, but for my colleagues in supply and logistics, we had to make sure we had the right people ready to support the client. We had to have the right equipment that would be correctly configured. That was critical. And from both from a customer and finance perspective. And as we know, once the prospect says yes, when do they want it? Like, they want it yesterday. So I was really dealing also with a secondary issue, and I'm sure many of you who are involved in forecasting out there, whether you're at the CEO level, you're running a branch, or you're running a team, or you're running yourself as a salesperson, there is a tendency for sales managers to forecast the same deal that didn't close last month, next month. Oh, it slipped. Well, it slipped because, someone's on vacation. Well, it slipped because, and there could be, endless reasons why the deals slip. So I put a rule in place, and I wanted to share that rule with you. And I did this through 3 companies that I led the sales function in. And that was, if you are going to forecast a deal to me, you can only forecast it once. And if it didn't close, then you owed it to me. So that put a real onus on the manager to really double check, because I wasn't just going to let them move deals arbitrarily early into a forecast, and there was a consequence. And as we know, consequences have to be positive and negative. And so, of course, we celebrated the positive accuracy, but there were consequences that if you forecasted it and it slipped, you owed it to me the next month. And so in terms of results and outcomes, our branch quickly got a reputation for its ability to accurately forecast the business. And our reps actually developed better close rates because they were significantly better able to identify the critical points in the sales engagement process and identify points where they could really better support the prospect. And probably most importantly, frankly, I could sleep at night as I actually felt like I knew where we were, and I wasn't going to have some crazy big surprise at the end of the month or quarter. So it was really a win-win all around. So in terms of some lessons learned and some counsel to any of you who are thinking of adopting such a process. So start by teaching the process internally and do some role playing. To work properly, it needs a solid setup. And so by that, I mean, you have to explain what's in it for the customer. So we would position, look, in order for us to better support you and make sure you and I are on the same page and I hit the right milestones for you, this is going to help me do that, ensure that you and I keep on track and I'm there for you. You also have to teach the reps to be ready for a big surprise. I cannot tell you the number of times a rep would be thinking, yep, this is coming for this quarter. Yep, we're 90 days, running on a 90-day cycle. Yep, it's going to be an end of the quarter deal. No problem, Karen. Yeah, got it all lined up. Everything's going forward, and we do a path to closure. And the customer says, "Yeah, I'm thinking, 2 quarters from now, I think is, about when things are going." And the sales rep just goes white. Totally not what they had expected. And so you have to teach them how to deal with the possibility that the timing may be completely misaligned to the timing that they had in their head. So you have to teach them to say, okay, well, I understood, and then go back and teach them how to revisit the buying criteria and the reason for the investment in the first place. So I would really encourage you to spend some time on that. And in the end, what you really want to have is you want to have the prospect sharing the steps, the dates, the deliverables, and the outcomes in a way that gets documented, to which you can both hold yourselves accountable. And I can tell you, for those that decide to give this a try, your results will be undeniable. So I would encourage you all to give it a try. If anybody wants more information on it, feel free to email me, khayward@chiefoutsiders.com. Thanks. Back to you, Cindy.